Hey everybody, and welcome back to Writing in the Dark. For those of you who haven't watched one of my videos before, I'm Tim Wagner. Write fantasy, dark fantasy, primarily known as a horror writer. I've been teaching writing for 30 years, and I make these videos to just give people like bits and pieces of advice. First, big news, my How to Write horror book, Writing in the Dark, came out last week from Raw Dog Screaming Press. I'll put a link in the comments so you can go ahead and check it out if you're interested. Today I wanted to talk about the top 5 lessons that I've learned over the years as a writer. The most enduring lessons, ones that if people have to say, off the top of your head, what's the most important things that people need to do in terms of being a writer, or most important lessons that stuck with you? These are the ones. So the first one was when I was an undergrad, probably about 30 years ago or so or more. I started off as a theater major before I finally eventually switched over to English. And for a while, along with writing like novels and short stories, I was also working on plays, trying a lot of different things to kind of see, what I was interested in or what I might be good at. And I had not too long before this seen the Rocky Horror Show for the first time in the theater with all the call and response and throwing stuff and everything. So super influenced by this, and I thought, I love monsters, love musicals, loved Rocky Horror. I'm going to try and do sort of my own thing. So I called the play Dementia Praecox, which is an old term for a mental illness. And, I tried to make it different than Rocky Horror, but it wasn't that different. And so I went to, I wanted to get feedback on it, so I went to a couple of my theater professors. And one of them, Dr. Jeffrey Huberman, who was the best teacher I've ever had because he was the toughest teacher I ever had. He absolutely refused to accept less than excellence from us because he knew we were capable of it, and that was terrifying. Not him, but the fact that he had that kind of belief in us because it forced us to kind of dig down. So it wasn't a surprise to me, when I showed him the play. I was really intimidated to show it to him because I knew he was going to tell me what he really thought. And when I showed it to him, he came to a point, he said, well, right here, and there was a stage direction that said, I forget what it was, probably like thunder and lightning, and then in parentheses I put, usual horror shit. And he said, it says usual horror shit. And I was like, oh no, I used a bad word. I had just written it for myself, really, at that point. I forgot it was there. And I started to apologize. He says, no, I don't care about the word. It's the usual part I care about. He said, you shouldn't write usual anything. You should, write whatever is most original to you, meaningful to you, something that is far out of the ordinary. Never do usual. And of course, he would say that because it's the kind of stuff he would tell us in class. And so I took his feedback to heart, and I rewrote the play, and I changed it around in all kinds of ways. There's some themes in there that I still explore in my work today. I never did anything with it. It was a musical with no music, for one thing, and just a play script and lyrics. But I'll never forget him saying, the standard horror shit, don't do standard anything. And so that's the kind of thing that I, pass along to people all the time. I don't care if you're writing in a recognizable genre, like fantasy, like horror. Find your way to do it. Find your stories. What makes your stories so different from other people's that nobody else could write them. Another time, this was later, maybe 10 years later or more, I was on the faculty at the Antioch Writers Workshop in Ohio, where I live. And during a lunch break, I was sitting with another faculty member, the literary writer Clinton McCowan. And as we were eating, he looked up at me and said, all fiction is mystery. And he didn't mean mystery as in detective solving mystery. He didn't mean that at all. What he meant was that fiction is not about telling people and showing people stuff. It's about revealing it slowly but surely. It's about who are these people and what's going on with them and why are they doing this and what's going to happen as a result and how hard is it going to be for them. All of these questions. And pondering this over the years, it changed the way that I approached fiction. I would always think about how do I set the scene? How do I establish this character? But you got to be careful not to do that so that people don't have the joy of discovery. That's why people read in a lot of ways, why they read fiction. They want to discover things for themselves. They want it to be revealed to them. Years later, I saw David Copperfield, the magician, do a live show. And as I was watching, I know that every single one of his illusions has a simple thing behind it, but it was the way that he did it, the way that he invited us to believe in a mystery, and then there was a reveal and all kinds of stuff like that. And it was the same idea. It was the joy of discovery, of suspense, of waiting, being surprised. So it's one of the things you really want to think about when you write your fiction. You want to remember that all fiction is mystery, and you want to do your best to keep that mystery alive. Give your readers little bits and pieces as you go, but allow them that joy of discovery. Don't take that away from them. It's what they read for. So another time, I was at a science fiction convention with the science fiction writer Mike Resnick, who passed away not too long ago. He'd been a professional writer for most of his life, so he had so many war stories to tell. He was great to learn from, great writer too. But I went to a reading of his, and during the reading or after the reading, somebody said something or asked a question about reviews of his writing, like how does he deal with or handle reviews of his writing. And he said, well, I never argue with people's opinions of my work. And I thought about that for a long time, because there are a couple, there are a lot of people that you see them, especially if they're new writers, that when they see a review on Goodreads or on Amazon, they feel they have to respond to it. They feel personally attacked because somebody may not have, appreciated their great work or whatever. And nobody's ever going to appreciate everything you write. There's nothing that everybody loves. But the thing about Mike's advice was that he said opinions. And it just is a quick and easy way to remember that it does not matter how well read a critic is. It does not matter if it's the first time they ever read a damn book and it's the first time they've ever made a comment about it somewhere. All of that is still opinion. There can be an informed opinion or less informed opinion, but ultimately they're opinions. And you can't argue with them because opinions are fact. They're fact in the sense that this is what this person really thinks. How are you going to argue with that? There is no arguing with that. Plus, all you end up doing with the arguing part of that, all you end up doing is making yourself look like a sensitive jerk. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't help you, connect with readers. It doesn't do anything for you good. Plus, it's just destructive inside yourself as well, because you're constantly on the lookout for all these bad reviews. You're constantly trying to respond to them, putting all this kind of mental energy into it, and you need that mental energy for your writing. So just remember, never argue with people's opinions of your books. Plus, it's because that opinions helps, because you're like, it's just your damn opinion. So you can always kind of ignore them, which is good. Something else I learned, I don't have a specific experience where I learned this. It's just something I've developed or picked up or thought about over the years. A lot of times, I don't know how many times I've been interviewed by this point, hundreds easily. Who knows, maybe I've hit 1,000 or more by now. I have no clue. Lots and lots. And people often will ask, what's the number one bit of advice that you give writers? Or what's the number one thing that a writer needs to have in order to, succeed or whatever? And, I've given different answers to that over the years. But the more I've thought about it, the more it's come down to one particular quality I think that writers need to have. And that's mental resilience. Sometimes you'll hear people say writers need a thick skin, in order to handle the bad feedback, or like we were talking about before, or a setback of some kind, or whatever. And the thick skin part is good, but it doesn't really describe what we need in terms of how to get through it. And that kind of mental resilience is what allows you to do it. You need to be able to go ahead and, not only have a thick skin, but if you get knocked down, you can get back up. Or you're like a tree that is supple enough to bend with the wind instead of breaking. You need to be able to withstand and come back and maybe learn from that. Take whatever positive things you can from that experience and then use them going forward. So you turn adversity into a strength that way. So probably trying to think of, a time when this mattered the most to me, or I kind of had the biggest challenge in mental resiliency was when I got my first novel contract. It was years ago. It was for a book called The Harmony Society, still in print today, but with a different publisher, of course, because it wasn't published the first time. A publisher offered a contract on it. I was thrilled. This was the first book I ever wrote that was like a me book. I really wrote a Tim Wagner kind of story, all the kind of things that I kind of am known for now in terms of horror, sort of nightmarish, surreal, existential horror. It's the first time I developed it at novel length. And the fact that the very first publisher my agent and I sent it to, they wanted it. And, it was a huge validation for that artistic risk that I took. And then for some reason, they suddenly told my agent that they were pulling the deal because they were no longer comfortable with the book. That's what they said, no longer comfortable with the book. I asked my agent what that meant, and he says it doesn't mean anything. They just decided not to do the contract. So that was, difficult as hell to go through, to have your very first novel contract, something you've worked for so long, something you've taken an artistic risk for and revealed more of yourself in your writing maybe than you ever did before, and then to have it fall apart. And then I was talking with my friend, the wonderful writer Gary A. Bronbeck, and he said, "You are so lucky to have this happen." And I said, "How in the hell am I lucky? This is awful." And he said, "You don't understand. The worst thing that can happen to you has happened. And if you can get past this, you will be ready to keep going. You will be ready for the other things that happen. Nothing's going to stop you." And of course, he meant the worst thing in writing, because there's awful things that could happen in people's lives that are far worse than losing a novel contract. But he was right. It really made a huge difference. And I'm really glad that happened. It taught me to be resilient, or to rely on that. And I've learned a lot from it over the years. I mean, I've written articles about that. I use this story when I do workshops and things. I've used it to try to help other people to illustrate, mental resilience. So try to cultivate that, because I think it's everything else being equal. Yes, you've learned to write. You're a good writer. You get better all the time. You're learning about the markets. You're doing all your social media stuff to, build networks and all that, and learn how to brand yourself and learn how to promote. All of that is beneath mental resilience, probably, and what you really need in order to continue to thrive and survive as a writer. So lastly, the bit of advice that probably the most important I ever got, and I always share with people, is when I was a freshman in college, around about the same year, or more or less, I wrote that play I talked about. I was in a composition course with a TA named Pam Doyle, and at our last conference that we had at the end of the semester, she said, "I urge you to take your writing as far as you can." Because she was telling me that, I was a good writer, and she saw something in there that I could cultivate. And over the years, that advice has been the most perfect advice I've ever gotten. And I pass it on all the time because there's no limit to it. She didn't tell me go be a bestseller or go sell 1 million copies or make $1 million or whatever. She said, take my writing as far as I could. And there's no way to know how far that is. I mean, I could keep doing it all of my life and never get there. That's not, something depressing. It's wonderful, because it means that the point is to keep going as far as I could. So I always tell people, I urge you to take your writing as far as you possibly can, and just keep trying to do that. All right, so those are the top 5 things, bits of advice that I would pass on. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and leave a link in the comments there, so you can go ahead and take a look at my book, Writing in the Dark, if you want to. If you have any comments, or you have anything that you'd like me to cover in another video, leave a comment down below, or go ahead and go to my website, timwaggoner.com. Got a contact tab there. You can email me or hit me up on social media and let me know. All right, so thanks very much. Keep writing.